Welcome into the Harvest Friends. We are here to build a community that helps you live out your faith in the everyday places of life. And what's unique about us is that we're trying to do the same thing every single day. So we hope to help you do the same. I am your host, Lakeith. And if you're a loyal listener, you know that today is different because usually either Abby or Andrew is hosting the show. So what we wanted to try to do is monthly, we'll switch up the hosts to bring you a different voice. And if you're like me and you're wondering, did Lakeith volunteer because it's February and it's Black History Month? Precisely, that is it. Yes, that is why I am here. So we have an amazing show lined up. We're going to be talking about worship because that topic comes up a lot, and why more intentional communities like ours seem not to value it as much. So Abby, Andrew, how you guys doing today?
Doing good, man. And you're making history. You're hosting the show.
Let's go.
How appropriate. We are in February 2000.
Abby, if you call me TB12, I will not be offended, okay? I will not be offended, all right?
Okay.
Abby, are you tracking with TB12? Because Cindy and I were talking about that earlier, and she had no idea what I was talking about.
Tom Brady.
What are we talking about?
Tom Brady, number 12.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
We're talking about.
Did you see how my face? Like I looked like I knew what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about TB12 getting his SB7 ring.
Yeah, it was pretty
Just
impressive.
happened.
And I know we're doing a pandemic and everything, but did you guys get to watch the game? Andrew, I know you did because we watched this together. Abby, did you watch the game?
No, that would be a big, strong no.
Big strong no. Yep.
We're not supposed to have parties right now, so we're like very rule abiding. Normally, I just show up for the party, and since there was no party, there was no showing up in any way. My kids watched a movie, so that was how we jammed it out.
And see, Keith and Steph did have a party, and Keith has become a smoking connoisseur, meaning cooking. He's
meat, yeah.
Yes, so he made wings, and he even made smoked macaroni and cheese.
It's pretty
which
fun.
I didn't know was possible, but was pretty amazing.
See, I'll take TB12, but smoking connoisseur, that might be a little bit too much, man. I have been dabbling in it. It's been pretty fun. We had a get together. I wouldn't say it was a party, not too many people came.
Sure.
Yeah, Andrew came and he shared his testimony during halftime instead of watching the show, because that's kind of how we do it. But it was really cool. So let's get started. We're going to get started with a listener question. So if you're listening to this podcast on the daily and you want to ask us a question, go ahead and submit it to us through info@intotheharvest.com. Or is it .org? Sorry.
.org. Yeah, you can email us there.
You can email it. You can send it on Facebook, IG, YouTube. We got it all. So if you got a question, we will try to have an answer. But this question comes in from Ashley Time. Is it pronounced Timmy? Okay. See, look, I'm already messing that up. All right. But the question is, what are some tips for how to reach out to someone in a different season of life, i.e., married women? Make sure they're reaching out to single ladies as well. So her question is about reaching out when the season of life looks different. And I think that's a huge question. So Abby, I'll let you take a stab at that first. What do you think?
Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
This is a great question. And I think if you have a pretty diverse community of just people in different seasons of life, then this will come up. I think the best way to handle this is just having lots of opportunity for communication about the seasons of life that you're in and the needs that you find in your season and maybe the blessings. I was recently chatting with a single friend, and she actually said, like, it would be great if we got together and did kind of a share session. That's hard to say. Where we talk about like what is on our heart in the season, like what's hard, what's not hard. And that way everyone can hear each other. And I thought that was really awesome. And it is funny because if you are married, then you can assume that at one point you were single and you should maybe remember what that's like. But honestly, you forget sometimes, like you forget the struggles that they're facing. And then obviously a single person probably doesn't know what it's like to have, however many small children or a husband or whatever. So I think that having an open communication where we ask each other really intentional questions about the season that the other person is in and see what their needs are and not assume that we know is really key. I think I tend to fall into the I know what they're dealing with, and just assuming that I can help them in whatever that is. But instead really asking good questions and really listening. So I think that's probably really key in having those good back and forth between seasons of life. What do you guys think?
Coming in hot, Abby, that was real good. My father-in-law, Ron J., said that I know was someone's famous last words. So I told him I know one time, and he kind of checked me with that. But I think that's true. Like assuming that you can relate, is always can be tricky. So I think a good alternative is to listen and to hear the person out, to try to understand their struggles. I think for me, observing my wife with the 2 kiddos and then having a small little child, little baby, and seeing her try to make an impact still in the community, it just looks way different now that we got more kids and that life slowed down for us. But it's made me appreciate her gifts because she's able to talk to people and communicate with ladies in a way that I can't. Like, I don't have that same gifting. I'm not wired that way. And she's able to relate to them because she's in a similar season. So it almost has made me appreciate where she's at and grateful for the season we're in, because her impact looks different, but it's still effective because she has a certain demographic that she can reach out to that I can't. So it's really, in my opinion, like highlighted her strengths. So, but what about you, Andrew? What do you think?
Well, I love this question. I do think it's a real issue. A few quick thoughts. One is that discipleship and disciple making, they're always meant to be generational. So there should be people in different seasons of life. Just that should be the norm for disciple making. And maybe in the modern world, we've started to really segment out different groups of people. So you've got the singles group, and you've got the married without kids, the married with kids, the seniors. And we've sort of taken this approach in the American church, I would say, in the past maybe 30 to 50 years, where we do segment out by age and demographic and season of life. But biblically, I think it's supposed to be a very diverse community that we're a part of. And this question specifically, reaching out to single women in particular, I do think is maybe there's a bigger jump, is my observation, between single and married men and single and married women, and children are one of the biggest differences there. So one thing I would say, and this isn't exhaustive, but I know my wife has encouraged women, married women with children before, especially if there's a mixed group where maybe you have several moms who are present, but also one or more single women. It's very easy for the conversation to really be dominated by child rearing. And so just being aware that there are some women there who don't have kids, that they can sometimes be left out of the conversation just because that's such a front and center concern. And for moms, a lot of moms, especially with young children. So just being aware that there is a difference there, and trying to engage conversations in a way that isn't just about the kids. But on the flip side of that, I think single people really benefit and enjoy being around a healthy family. So especially since fewer and fewer people grow up in a healthy family setting, if you have that, that's a huge part of benefiting others just by bringing them into that environment. So I also don't think that you have to necessarily cater everything to a single person. I think bringing them into a healthy, stable family environment is a part of making disciples. And so just trying to have that balance, I guess, between being aware of the distinctions, but also inviting people in. But it's a great question by Ashley, and it's definitely one that I've seen be a real challenge in disciple making.
Yeah, I love that. And just to add on to what you guys have already said, just embrace your season. I think that's big. And Andrew, I can attest to what you were saying about your wife, and observing Cindy and living with the Strouds was super helpful for me, because there was things that I could learn from Cindy just by watching her that were different from what I was getting from Andrew. And those will impact my life for the rest of my time on earth. Like it was that impactful. So you think of Paul, and when he was in jail, throughout so much of the New Testament, like his demographic were jailbirds, you know, like he could reach out to the guards and the people in jail, like, and he thrived in that environment. But I think it was because he embraced that season he was in. So I would say don't overthink it. Like it's gonna change. Like you're gonna be here, you're gonna be there, you know, and I guess embrace it and let God work through it. So great question, Ashley. Sorry for messing up your name a little bit. I hope you forgive me, but you had an awesome question, and I was looking through the notes. You had a couple of them, so thank you. Please keep submitting those questions. We will try to make it a part of our show weekly. So yeah, don't be shy about those questions. All right, guys, for our main topic, let's talk about worship. I love this question and I love this topic because we've all been a part of intentional ministries and really missional communities. And one of our critiques or criticisms is that we don't put an emphasis on worship and more specifically singing and praise. Funny story for me, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, but I actually ended up going to church on the west side of Chicago. I went to Greater Mount Zion New Baptist Church, and there we sang a lot of gospel. Like that was the thing growing up. What I didn't realize is that gospel music was not the gospel. So when somebody explained to me that there was a thing called the gospel, I was like, yeah, I know that. That's music, man. Like, come on. Like, but yeah, it was very enlightening for me to get educated on that one. So Andrew, we've been fortunate enough to partner with each other over the years, and this topic has come up a lot. So yeah, we'll let you tackle it first. But what do you think about us not putting as much emphasis on singing and worship?
Yeah, I think this is definitely something that's come up a lot of times in our smaller, more informal gatherings, whether they're on Sunday morning or at some other time during the week. The question will often come up like, hey, why don't we do more praise and worship? And I think there's a few reasons for this. We probably won't be able to explore all of them. One is what I would say, what I might call the professionalization of our idea of what it means to worship. So if you don't have the praise team and you don't have the worship leader and you don't have like this really professional sounding group or even just great singers, then you don't have worship. So that's one thing is we're trying to go back to the heart of worship, which is not something that requires a professional band, or I would say even a highly talented band, or even a band. So that's one thing. Is I think we have to see what the Bible actually describes as worship, and a distinction between praise and worship, because those have often been pressed together as if they're one and the same, even though they're connected. Another thing that I would say is that we're probably reacting to an overemphasis on the emotional side of praise music and modern day praise and worship music, where it's more about creating an atmosphere and a feeling within the people who are participating versus really instructing people and directing them towards God. And so we want to make sure that the worship that we engage in as a gathering of believers in our churches really does direct our attention to God and really does exalt Him, not just exalt us, which is really, it's tricky. It's something that can easily happen, that we can engage in praise and worship music and be drawn to it because of how it makes us feel. But that is not what the heart of worship is about. The heart of worship is about exalting God and declaring His honor, His worth. And you can do that with singing. So we're not saying that you shouldn't sing, but I do think that we're probably trying to counteract what we see in the larger church culture.
Yeah, so here at Enter the Harvest, we will never, and I mean never, start a band. So if you're looking forward to that, no, I'm just kidding. I think I do agree with everything you said, Andrew. But I do feel, I guess, the need to take ownership and say, yeah, we could do a better job at making sure people have that, be a need or be something that it's involved in our fellowship. Because if you grew up with that and that was a way you related to God and to His people, it does make sense to to have that be a part of what we do. But I love what Andrew's saying. Like, we have to keep it in perspective and kind of go back to what it means to worship God biblically. And I think that's easier said than done. So if you have suggestions or like, feedback for communities like ours, because you might have a perspective that we don't have, and we need it, to be honest. So I think something that we've tried to do, there'll be some newcomers coming to like our Sunday morning gathering or just kind of jumping in with our community, and they feel very strongly about singing and praise music. And eventually we'll give into it, and we're like, all right, you're right, like, let's go for it. And those people don't stick around, so like maybe we weren't scratching the itch, like maybe our band just we didn't make a band, but like we really tried. So I think along with the ownership, I would also say like, hey, I ain't gonna say cut us some slack, but be understanding, like be committed to that community regardless of if they're not really hitting that mark. But Abby, what about you? What do you think what do you think about this question right here?
Well, it's definitely hit us right on the nail, right? And it kind of makes me feel good to know that, you guys in San Diego are dealing with the same things that we are here in Texas. This is just like an ongoing house church, like small gathering problem like that you face. So if you out there are trying to gather in your home and you're also feeling this, then just know we're all with you. So I was just happy to see it come through. Like when you sent me the text, Keith, this is what we were talking about. You guys, just yesterday, we had church, and we had half of our church people were on Zoom and half were in person. My sweet husband was the tech guy, and he had figured out how to play this song like by sharing his screen with those on the screen, and then he muted us so that they couldn't hear us singing, and then it muted completely for them, so they were just seeing the picture, and it was the hottest of messes. No one was worshipful, by the way. Like, I don't think anyone felt worshipful in the moment, and it was hilarious. And I said thank you to all of them, and I said thank you because I have content for tomorrow's podcast, which is what it's all about. So I tell you that story just to say that I think we can try hard to like make it look like a traditional church. And I don't even think that's wrong either. I don't think what our heart was doing yesterday was wrong, because what the song we were wanting, it was an old hymn. It had really great words. I mean, I think we could have been very worshipful. All that to say, it can be hard to translate what we have all grown up with in church into a small gathering. And so it's probably best for us to just throw it all out the window. 2020 probably did the best job with this, because even those that had rock star musicians in their midst, like you were just gifted with like an amazing guitarist, or for a little while we had this chick in our church, shout out to Christina. She could harmonize with anybody, and she like brought us up a whole level.
Wow.
But then, the army moved her away. But all that to say, even if you have gifted people, 2020 made it impossible because of, having to do Zoom churches and all the kinds of craziness that we're involved in. And I really am thankful for that, because in that process, we stopped trying to be like traditional church, and we really did have to look back at what it really meant. Like Andrew was saying, biblically, what is worship, and how do we get into that space of being worshipful of the Lord? So we had to ask us like those questions, and we have done a lot of reading out loud of the Psalms, like a ton this year. Like, wow, never been so grateful for David and Solomon and all the psalm writers. And we've even done some like fun reading as a body. So like everyone will like repeat certain parts, and it kind of adds that like element of corporate worship. It's been really sweet, I think, personally. And this is coming from someone, by the way, I love worship music. I love me some jams. We didn't talk about how each of us felt about worship music. I'm going to guess. I'm going to go ahead and guess, and then you guys can tell me. Andrew could care less. He doesn't care about it at all. And I think Keith, growing up with the gospel background, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm going to say that he likes music, but he doesn't necessarily need it in church. So that's what I'm going to guess. You guys will get to you in a second. But I personally had to come a long way. Like, I had to learn to do that on my own with worship music, like just me and Jesus in the worship music. I had to learn how to make that part of our time together as a body. I had to learn to like have a bazillion children interrupting. I had to, that was all adjustment. And I think my final answer is that it's going to look, maybe of all the things about house church, this is the one that's going to look the most different. Like, buckle up. It's going to be, we are not going to be able to pull this one off, guys. No. So anyway, did I get it right? I want to know.
I like good music. If it happens to be Christian, I would say that a lot of what I hear, a lot of the modern, like I'll get in the car and Cindy's got the local Christian radio station on, and it doesn't do it for me. Most of it does not do it for me. But every now and then, there's a great song on there. So,
yeah, bad company corrupts good morals. So, Andrew, he's broke me, guys. He's broken me. No, I'm just kidding. I do want to give a shout out to our small praise team on Sunday. I think they've really done a good job. And Justin Taylor, a dude didn't know how to play the guitar a year ago, and now he can literally lead us through a song. So impressive.
I want to say, the question, I like the way you phrased the question originally, and we may be giving the wrong impression. The question is, why do more missional type communities like the ones we've been involved with seem like they don't value praise and worship music? And I think that's really the issue is, it's not that we don't engage in it. It's just that we don't place the same emphasis on it that many people are accustomed to. And so it seems like we don't value it. But we've had flutes, we've had guitars, we've had pianos, and we have had bagpipes.
No joke.
It's not that we don't have music in our gatherings.
Wow.
We've gone a cappella.
Wow.
Yeah, we try.
So now I'm not saying it always sounds good, but we have had all of those things. And so it's not that we don't engage in singing. We don't always, but we're not opposed to it. It's just that most people experience it as a lower emphasis and value than maybe what they're used to.
In the middle of breaking history right here, I want to be a good host. So for the sake of time, we're going to move on to that next question. So rapid fire, what is worship? Like, what is biblical worship, guys? And Abby, we'll start with you. What is biblical worship?
Well, I would say, I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but biblical worship is really being purposeful in coming before God and worshiping him for who he is, aside from like what's going on around us. So even if we're in like a really hard emotional place, we should still hopefully be able to find a place of worship. And that really requires the Holy Spirit. So I would say the worship, true biblical worship, is going to require the Holy Spirit to be a part of our time. And it's a really, really should be focused on God and who he is. It should have very little to do with us. So I think that is biblical worship to me anyway.
Yeah, I like that definition. Andrew, how about you, man? I'll try to go last.
So my quick definition of worship would be directing our attention and building our lives around God. And so you can worship on an individual level. In fact, we're called, to in everything we do, worship God. Romans 12 talks about that, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And this is your acceptable form of worship. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 10. Let everything you do be done to the glory of God. So worship is something that should be happening 24/7. But when we come together as a body of believers and we choose to worship God, it means that we're making a special effort to direct our attention to him and to build our gathering around him. And I think we're worshiping biblically when we do that.
Yeah, I think that's good. I don't have much to add on that, except for just thinking about Jesus in Luke 4. It's a weird passage to choose for worship, but what the enemy was essentially asking him to do was to worship him. Like, hey, if you fall down and worship me, like I'll give you all of this stuff. And we know that God was able to give it to Jesus and was going to, but Jesus had to go about it in obedience to God. So that was just really striking for me to think about, like, wow, like Satan was asking Jesus to worship him in that moment. What did that look like? What did he want him to do? Like, I don't think he wanted him to break out a song towards him, like I think it was much more than that. Like I really do with all my heart. Like I think there was a lot more tied to that. So biblical worship does look different than what we see today. It kind of reminds me of my story about the gospel. Like for a long time, I was convinced that the gospel was a form of music, So thank God for him being able to teach us in those moments. But last question, guys, how have you seen worship play out in your life? And where have you seen it show up in your personal life and walk with God?
Well, I'll jump in on this one first. We're actually going through the book of Ephesians during our Sunday gathering right now. And I was really struck by these verses from Ephesians chapter 5. He tells us to be filled with the Spirit, to speak to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, to sing and make melody with your heart to the Lord, to always give thanks for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, the Father, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And all of those are opportunities to worship. And so I was struck how it says to be filled with the Spirit, that it's actually contrasted with getting drunk. So that's interesting to me, is that, being filled with the Spirit is something that we're commanded. It's not something that we hope happens. And just as you have control over getting drunk, like you can actually choose behaviors that lead to getting drunk, you can choose behaviors that lead to you being filled with the Spirit. And that's really what he begins to describe there. He says, speak to one another in Psalms. Abby, just what you guys were saying, very biblical. Like you're reading the Psalms to one another. Hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord. So absolutely singing is a part of our worship. And then always giving thanks for all things. And I actually think that this is kind of the underrated secret weapon of worship, is giving thanks. And so when you make the choice to give thanks to God, whether that's in an individual basis where you choose to take inventory of life and you offer God thanks, you're worshiping him.
Yeah.
And when you're with other people, other believers, and you choose to credit God with the good things that are happening in your life, and even give thanks to him for the challenges and the setbacks that you're experiencing, that is worship. So it's not just a feeling, it's not just singing. There are all kinds of ways that we can worship God. And when we do, I think that's kind of the secret to becoming filled with the Spirit is to worship God.
Yes, Andrew, I got to take that, man. I love that, because I think that's so true. Like some of the times where I've literally felt my whole body and heart and soul like go to God has been in those moments where I'm literally overwhelmed by his goodness. The psalmist talks a lot about the loving kindness of God. And when you feel that, like you just react, So there was a quote we came up with a couple years ago that says, I'm thankful to God for any circumstances that forces me to pray. So when you're being forced to acknowledge God and give him worth in those moments, like, oh man, it gets me so much. So there's so much to worship in God. And that can happen when we see him doing work in our lives. How about you, Abby?
Well, I'm going to give you two examples. One is like non-singing related and the other is singing related, because I do think that we have both. One was in our church during this 2020 time. Somebody, like, we take turns leading that worship portion of our church, and whoever was leading at the time, I don't even remember who it was, which is also great, by the way, tangent, is that they just had us all like rapid fire just go around and thank God for things in our life. We're supposed to do it really quickly, so it wasn't just like a long monologue, but just like name off the things that we were thankful for. And just being in a group of people and having them all just rapid fire listing off things, it was helpful for my heart, just hearing the things that they were thankful for. It helped me be more thankful. Like maybe one of them listed something that I also should be thankful for, and I hadn't even thought of it. And so it was really corporate worship in a really beautiful way, but there was no singing happening. It was just a really sweet time. Once again, saying that when the Holy Spirit shows up, it can be so worshipful, and it really has nothing to do with what is going on, like musical wise. I've had wonderful worship times with like incredibly gifted musicians. I've also had wonderful worship times with like not so gifted musicians. And so I think that also is pointing to Jesus and to Holy Spirit, because I've been in like little teeny tiny churches where there's like a very out of tune piano and like a bunch of people who really none of us carry a tune super well. And then just like in the middle of an old, like Ancient of Days hymn, you're just like, oh, this is so good and so true. And you just feel the words of that incredible hymn written by an incredible hymn writer, which usually they're going through something horrible. Hymn writers are always going through the worst stuff.
True.
So all that to say, I really, when thinking about this question, Keith, I was trying to like, what are the best worshipful moments I've had? And really none of them, I mean, some of them were like just gifted musicians who just lead worship really well. And God had given them that gift, which is just wonderful for the body of Christ, but it's not necessary. And I think when we take a step away from that necessary like talent, and just really focus on the Holy Spirit, like really great things happen. So I think those are my two examples.
Yeah, that's excellent, Abby. I think that's really good. So for our last segment of the day, we're going to be moving into our faith and culture segment. And I've heard it said that being relatable is not debatable. So we really want to relate to topics and things that are going around today. I made that, Abby. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, we want to talk about things that's going on in the modern world because they are relevant. So for today's question, it's you guys remember when the whole stock market thing went crazy with AMC and GameStop, and it got us thinking like how should believers approach the stock market and long-term saving? Like how should we deal with that? And yeah, how do you see that playing out? So who wants to tackle that first?
Oh, I thought you were going to tackle that first.
Oh, no, all right, I'm up. I'll go. Did I? So I think it could look different for different people. So my first thought was about Paul. Like, doesn't sound like God was going to have Paul saving up for a rainy day. You know, like he was to make tents and live off of what he made. And then when the church was able to make contributions to him, yeah, he was to take that and really go hard for the gospel, if that makes sense. But then you got a guy like Joseph of Arimathea, where you can tell he was a very wealthy man, you know, and his tomb ended up going to Jesus to be buried in a new tomb that never had been touched by man. So for him, it looked different. So I think, this is one you have to wrestle with God, but I do think it's okay to save after you've been generous and faithful to God in your giving. And yeah,
I like that. I think I would land in the same place, Keith. And there's a few verses that have always challenged me, and I think that's a good thing. You know, Jesus, for one of them is when Jesus says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven." And in that same passage, he says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I think it's undeniable. So if you have no money in the stock market and it totally collapses, you don't really care. Your heart isn't there. But if you have treasure, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. If you've got a lot of treasure in the stock market and it collapses, then, your heart, you feel that, So I think it's absolutely true that we need to be aware of how treasure and finances affects our heart, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be. But I also agree. The flip side of that is that all of us work, and all of us to an extent we save. So every month I've got to pay rent. So I'm not necessarily spending every dollar I have every day, because I know that there are expenses that are coming in the future and I need to be able to meet those expenses. So at a base level, I would say there's nothing wrong with investing, whether that's in the stock market or in some other opportunity that you have that's going to pay out in the future. That's your hope. I think the concern that we need to be alert to is, where is my heart at in this? And I know that sounds so vague, but I actually I try to take stock of that. Like, hey, if this money zeroed out is my hope, is my heart in this, or am I simply trying to be a good steward because I'm aware that there are expenses coming in the future, and I'm like in Proverbs with the ant, I'm storing up for winter. And when I'm able to say, you know what, if it all went to zero, I don't think I would lose sleep. I don't think, I mean, it'd be a bummer, but I don't think it'd be something that would just like devastate my faith, or I think I would be able to say, okay, Lord, there's something else that you've got planned, and I'm okay with that. So I think that heart check is something that I've tried to put into practice. And then what you said also is true, that there's a priority. So am I being generous? Am I giving in the present, or am I just squirreling it all away? That was the indictment that Jesus gave the rich man in Luke 16, is that he had stored up his wealth in his barns, but also that he had not been rich toward God. So it wasn't just that he had stored up wealth in his barns. It was that he was not rich toward God. And so be rich toward God and try to save for the future. To me, there's not a conflict there.
If you know Andrew well too, him being bummed kind of moves him into the feeling of tears, not tears, but the feeling of tears. So
as Abby says, yes, the feeling of tears.
That's right. Andrew would be like, ooh, I lost everything. That's rough. Well, I don't have much to add. You guys really nailed it, I think. I really do think it's all about the heart. For some of us, giving is just a part of who you are. I think some people are just really gifted in giving. I totally married one of those people, which is a great gift to me because it keeps me on track. I, on the other hand, am a very responsible saver. And I was a full-on adult when I realized that I always felt like savings accounts were things you put money into and then you literally never took money out. That was how savings were supposed to be. And it really shook me to the core when you took money out of savings accounts. I guess I didn't understand how they worked. So all that to say, I really had to do a check there of my heart, that I would often say, I totally trust God to take care of us. What I really meant was, I totally trust my ability to save money really well. If something bad happens, we're going to be okay. This really came into play when Brett got out of the Army. That was a really huge transition for our family because we'd always been in the military and we had that solid military paycheck that always shows up unless the government shuts down. So all that to say, I really had to check, was I actually meaning that? Did I mean what I said when I said that I trusted God no matter what? And the Lord has been very kind to me by putting us in many situations over the years where we could not handle things on our own and then we 100% needed God. So I think we do have to honor him by stewarding what he gives us well, and and saving, and not just going to Target, which is my other thing I do. So I'm very diverse in nature. So those two things together, being a good steward of what you're given so that you can be generous, but then also not putting your faith in that savings account, which is basically what you guys just said, but maybe I said it not as great. So wait in as well. You're welcome.
No, I thought that was great. I thought that was great, Abby. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate you guys so much. If you're like me, you probably spend a lot of time on YouTube, and there's some channels that's putting out some awesome content, but then you come across channels how did they get so big, But if you want to be a part of what we're doing, it starts with people who believe in what you're doing. So feel free to share this with somebody else, comment, subscribe to our page. I think that would be awesome. Or you can do it the ancient way and word of mouth. Just share this with somebody. And we will see you guys in a couple weeks. Bye, guys.